Welcome. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your evening with us. We appreciate it very much. Our discussion tonight is called The Talent Imperative, New Insights for Building Tomorrow's Workforces. And with us to weigh in are Tracy Brower of Steelcase, Wang of Constellation Research, and Burton of Poly. Thank you very much for being here as well. Now, Joe has agreed very kindly to guide the conversation. We have asked him to weigh in on the topic as well, so we kind of get a twofer with Joe. Thank you, Joe, to contribute your views. Special thanks to Steelcase, especially Lisa Christensen and Tracy Brower, and yes, and One Workplace, especially Cheryl Alberico, Liz Ferrari, Mark Baker, Carolyn Clark Beadle, Dave Bryant, and Kelly Stites for their partnership in creating this program. Thank you. We also thank Poly for their sponsorship and assistance with content, especially Shannon Shamoon and Edie Kisco. As always, it takes a knowledgeable and giving group to put these programs together. We appreciate it very much. Thank you all. Churchill Club is if you don't know us, the premier independent thought leadership forum in the Bay Area. Our nonprofit mission is to strengthen innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. And in our conversations, we look for opportunities that are represented by some of the trends that are unfolding before us that we are all living through as call us innovation workers, and we try to get at the implications of these trends for opportunities for innovation, et cetera. So we think of ourselves as forward-leaning in that way. We always ask our speakers not to pitch and promote, and they're fine with that, so that's great. So a couple things before we bring up our panel. First, the hashtag for this program is Churchill Club. And then second, we actually have some incredible giveaways for you. I don't know if you noticed this, but there was a place to put your card in. If you haven't done that and you want to participate, you can just pass your information down to the end of the row, and they'll put your card in for the drawing. There are, let's see, we have 10 Voyager headsets from Poly. We have one Elite Steelcase silk chair, and the winner will have the opportunity to select their own finishes, place a custom order, and have the chair delivered. And one gorgeous, I will botch this, Coalesce Eniolatus chair from One Workplace. And so the winners will be announced at the end of the program, so get your name in there if you're interested in those things. Since we're here now in the incredible, recently transformed One Workplace showroom and offices, we had the opportunity to invite Dave Ferrari, the president of One Workplace, and Christopher Good, who is the creative director, up to talk to us a little bit. Dave has led this organization and seen the industry through changes for over 45 years and has some very interesting perspectives. And then Chris led the process of transforming this space into what you are seeing today. So they've got some things to talk to us about, and let's welcome them now. Dave and Chris.
Welcome, everybody. You hear me okay? Yes. Great. So One Workplace is a business that's owned by my family, and I'm a fourth-generation native Bay Area San Josean. So over the scope of my life, I've seen a lot of change here, because when I grew up, this was tomatoes out here right next to the airport when they put it in, and we were orchards and all that type of thing. And we've seen tremendous change, and we continue to transform ourselves. One of the great things that's happening is they announced on Friday we got 3.2% gross domestic product. That's phenomenal economic conditions that we're working in that we haven't seen in a long time. We've got record unemployment. There's 7 million jobs in the U.S. for 6 million people. These are unprecedented times, and it's going to be a challenge for all of us to meet the growing needs of our business, especially a business like ours, where we rely heavily on middle-class folks. And the middle class is kind of getting pushed out of California right now. We've got super high housing costs. We've got high taxes. And my generation, the baby boomers, there's a lot of us that are moving elsewhere to retire in lower-cost areas and taking people with them. And so we have a lot of competition here for talent. We have to compete against the same companies that everybody else competes against. We're competing with Google for talent, for LinkedIn for talent, and we're not in a business that's even remotely related other than they're our customers. But we're competing from that same pool. And as a company, we've been challenged to figure out what are we going to do about it. So we've recently made acquisitions. We acquired a business like ours that's down in Salinas in the Central Valley. Last Friday, we announced an acquisition of a company in Sacramento because we want to be able to provide our employees flexibility and choice of where they work, but still be able to participate with what we're doing here in Silicon Valley. And as you know, there's more affordable housing. You know, somebody starting a family, they want the American dream. They want to raise their family in a home that they own. And we feel that by going, business is going to have to push out there because we've got a major housing shortage here, and it's the only place for people to go. And so some of the other trends that we're seeing that are impacting our business have to do around construction. For every baby boom generation skilled trade worker, somebody like me that's leaving the marketplace, there's only 3 more coming in. And so we see off-site pre-manufactured product coming more into residentials, coming more into commercial buildings so that they can build them faster. In our business, it's rare that we ever have a project finish on time, not because we can't get what we do there, it's because the construction schedules have slipped anywhere from a month to 3 months to 5 months to 6 months. In some cases, we had one slip 2 years because of regulatory issues. And so the offsite prefab we think is going to help transform the Bay Area by being able to get things done a lot faster. With that, as we look at our strategy to continue to grow, technology is going to make a big impact on that. New technologies that are out there that enable our employees to participate in teams and meetings, whether it's Zoom technology or some of the other technologies that are out there, are helping us transform our organization so that we can recruit outside of this marketplace to really anywhere in the country. And so with that, we moved here 5 years ago. We've gone through a complete transformation because the entire market shifted. And I want to hand it over to Chris to talk a little bit about that transformation process, how we did it, some of the analytics we used to do it, and I think you'll find it very interesting. So go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Dave.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Good.
So I imagine the best part of my job is really leading the team that helped make this experience for all of you happen. It's a space that means a lot to us because it defines our culture, our values, our organization, our people. And a little over a year ago, I was challenged with taking a space that was already amazing and already beautiful and transforming it, as Tracy said, or Karen said, into something entirely new, entirely something special and different. Pretty big challenge. And so we began a discovery process that we thought was simply a refresh. We would take a space that just needed to be updated, some new finishes, some new colors, make it pretty, shiny, and beautiful again, and help it address some of our growth. We were expanding. We didn't quite fit the way we used to fit. We might expand into some adjacent area, add some more workspace. Simple. Well, in that discovery process, and helped by our friends at Steelcase, who helped us look a little deeper, we installed sensors throughout this building and studied how we lived and how we worked and how we used this space. And the findings were surprising. We weren't using that space all that well. The team who had owned workspace, who came here every single day, were only using that space about 29% of the time. 70% of the time, we weren't here in this building. We were other places, with our customers at home, working from all these other places that Dave just described. We needed to think about this a little differently. We realized this project was going to completely reshape our entire approach and experience of work. Big stuff. So looking a little deeper, we realized that if we were going to make that change was going to affect us psychologically, culturally, because we would need to address, if we're going to become more efficient and more effective, our relationship to this place. I may not have an owned place to come to every single day, and that's going to affect my psychological state, my sense of value, my sense of belonging to the organization, and we may have to give back something equally meaningful to all of those team members to help that really resonate with us and realize that this is a place that I really still want to belong. Part of that was the flexibility to choose when and where I want to work. Part of that was having neighborhoods, places that we can belong when we do come here, but a suite of other experiences that were the absolute best possible places for us to focus or collaborate or learn or rejuvenate, whatever those experiences were, and to provide those places here and give everybody the choice on when and how and where they use them, or when they don't, when they might work from home or some other place. One other thing we had to look at in that exploration process was maybe the nature of our entire work. We realized that the skills and the knowledge that brought us to this place, that allowed us to be so successful, may or may not be the same knowledge and skills that would allow us to be successful into the future. In an industry that's changing every single day, our ability to learn new things, identify new manufacturers, new products, new ideas, to generate those ideas ourselves was as important as our ability to deliver. Our ability to learn new things was as important as our ability to deliver. In short, if we weren't learning, we weren't working. This wasn't just a workspace, it was a learning space. And every single element of this building had to support both of those functions. So we began thinking of it in terms of a framework, the ability to apply, the ability to learn, and understand that those things happen in both social and private settings. And how do we find moments throughout this building, or maybe every single space, that can support those things? The ability to apply what I learn or what I know in a social way, as a group, or with one other person, or maybe by myself in a focused way. So as you walked around earlier, and maybe if you get a chance to walk around a little bit later, I'm hoping you'll have a chance to see how we've applied that. We've actually labeled some spaces in terms of how they fit along that framework and how they have features and characteristics that allow us to support those different modes of influencing or collaboration or focus. And so tonight, I'm super excited to turn you over to an amazing panel that's going to help us on this journey of learning in a place that's designed for just that experience. And so thank you guys so very much. And I'll carry this back over to Karen and launch you for the evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dave. And now let us welcome our panel, Joe, Ray, and Tracy. Thank you.
Well, perfect. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. And I think we have a really incredible topic we're going to talk about tonight. So overall, really the primary topic for tonight is what tomorrow's talent looks like and how workforces will operate is arguably the most important topic in business and society today. He mentioned that there are literally more quality jobs out there now than there are people looking for a job. Wow, what the heck do we do about that? So there's also far bigger trends unfolding going forward, and more simultaneously than ever before. So from automation, artificial intelligence, data analytics, and many, many others, I think we literally all believe, probably all of us, that the nature of work is going to change more in the next 10 years than in the last 100. More in the next 10 years than in the last 100. That's astonishing when you think about what's already happened. Jobs are going to be gained and lost. Upskilling needs are going to be enormous. Somebody asked at my company recently, how many of our jobs are going to be impacted by AI, analytics? And my answer was, all of them, twice, in the next 10 years, give or take. Wow. It's the world we're moving into. Technology use is going to be critical. The types of jobs that people do, the flux and change is going to be enormous. So our intent tonight is to actually give some new insights on some of this. In keeping with the Churchill Club's way of doing things, we want to talk about what's new, what's next, and what isn't widely known yet. I think you'll hear a little bit of devil's advocacy around some of the trends that you've been hearing a lot about. So I can't wait. I think it's going to be a great conversation, and then we're going to talk for a little while, and then actually turn it over to all of you for a little bit of Q&A as well. So we want to hear from you, and then we'll wrap. But before we get started, let's do a little self-introduction. So Tracy, you want to lead us off and tell us a little about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. I'm Tracy Brower. I'm a principal with the Applied Research and Consulting team at Steelcase. Our role and goal in life is to take the amazing research that Steelcase does and really bring it to our customers and partners. My background is my PhD is in the sociology of work. My master's is in organizational culture and organizational development. My book is is called Bring Work to Life, which presents some alternative ways of thinking about work-life balance. And I write for Forbes and Fast Company.
Wow. I'm Wang with Constellation Research. I'm the founder and CEO. We spend a lot of time looking at business models and transformation around exponential technologies and the impact. And so this includes things like future of work, customer experience, employee experience, and also trying to figure out how these technologies change the way we look at the human element.
Fantastic. So I'm Joe Burton, as I mentioned. I'm the CEO of Poly. Poly is the merger of Plantronics, the world's largest maker of business headsets, and Polycom, which made video conferencing, audio conferencing, desktop phones for many years. So about a year ago, we brought these together, 100% focused on actually the future of work. So we make every piece of technology that you touch to collaborate in an open workspace, when you're on the road, et cetera. So these trends are very, very topical for us as well. So to kick things off, Tracy and Ray, let's talk a little bit about some of the context that affects our picture of today's workforce. What are the big forces that are at play, and kind of what do they imply? Anybody want to lead?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, we are so shy, we decided earlier. It's, yeah.
No, I'll jump in, right?
That worked out.
So when we think about like where we work, when we work, how we work, what we work, and even the motivation of why we work, it's completely transformed, right? Think about it, like you are working 24/7. You're working sometimes, you're working from vacation, right? If you think about where you work, it can be anywhere. Right? It doesn't have to be within the four walls of an office, right? If we think about what we work on, that changes almost every day. It could be a project, it could be a gig, it could be something that you've been working on for a very, very long period of time, and then the ADD kicks in, right? So what do we do? Like, how do we focus on that? And then sometimes that motivation of why we work, that's the part that is changing, right? It's not just money. Sometimes it's about a mission, a purpose, right? And we're seeing that big shift happen where we go from companies that actually reflect a brand to companies that actually activate movements. And that's one of the biggest things that's shifting is that money factor might not be enough anymore. It could be the workspace, the environment. It could be the mission, the purpose. Why you do that becomes a lot more important than what you're working for.
Nice, yeah. I mean, I think that we have an opportunity to rethink attraction and retention. Like attraction and retention has been such a buzzword or set of words, and I think it's so much more about engagement and development. And I think that as we think about big trends, there's the whole idea of digital transformation. Agile's a subset of that, right? Like, how are we using digital in terms of the way that we operate our organizations? How are we using digital in the way that we think about connecting with our customers? So digital transformation's a big deal. I think that our social dynamics are a big deal today and how that is shifting. And I think at an individual level, the implication of that is how we think about ourselves and our own value. Like, I think we're in this conversation today about, oh my gosh, are machines going to replace me? Is digital transformation going to outstrip personal and human talents and skills? And we've actually been worried about that as a society since the 50s. This isn't something new. And yet, it's so much more salient today because it has to do with our identity and our value and the way that we think about ourselves in relationship to others. And so those social dynamics are key. But what do you think, Ray? Joe?
Joe, either one of us.
Ray, my partners.
Ray was so shy earlier. I mean, maybe I'll give it a try. I think it's really fascinating, as you say. As we move forward on these big trends, we've been involved in this thing, my personal journey, not only when I talk to customers, but we're bringing together 7,500 people into a new company, right? And when we talk about, very much to your point, when we talk about we could build great products, people go, yeah, all right. When we talk about we can make a difference, man, they sit up. When we talk about, we can do something you can be proud to tell your grandkids about. There's real problems going on with human attention and ADD, as you mentioned, and how do we help people be in that perfect moment if they're in the office, if they're out of the office, have a sense of belonging. People want to do that almost for free. They want to make that difference in the world, and I think establishing that purpose, establishing that way to restore human connection, really is more important to people than money after a certain point, right?
Yeah, can I
So
build
it's
on
exciting.
that?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I think is pretty cool is as we think about purpose, purpose is about three things, right? Purpose is about there's something bigger than myself, number one. Number two, it's something I can make a difference in. Like there's a connection between my skill and what that bigger thing is. And number three, it's always about people. Like I'll get up in the morning and I'll sign up for that 15% growth corporately and I'll be a good corporate citizen, but by goodness, it's the reflection on people and the connection to others and the belonging piece that really will motivate me. Like there's a great book called Blue Zones where it talks about areas of the world where people live to ridiculously long ages in ridiculously good health. And Okinawa, Japan is one of those places. And there's a concept called ikigai. Ikigai means the reason I wake up in the morning. It's the reason I exist. It's my connection. And I just really like that in terms of your connection and talking about purpose. That's really helpful.
So at a practical level, I mean, if that's really, if it's all about, maybe not all about, but this purpose is important to people, and we're moving into this purpose-driven companies and maybe even society, kind of at the practical level, how does that play out over the next 3 or 5 years? What's the advice?
I think the challenge is this fear that's going on with automation and artificial intelligence. I'm trying to figure out where my job will be. Can I work in a gig economy? What do I do in terms of a career? Is it a really career or is it not a career, right? And I think all those things, that level of ambiguity, it's exciting on one level. On the other hand, people are scared, right? They're worried about, hey, will these, back to your point earlier, even since the 50s, will these machines take over our jobs? And I think that part, I'd ask the audience, how many people here think machines will take over their jobs, right? Well, we got a lot of optimistic folks, right?
We do. An optimistic group, by goodness.
Yeah, I mean, and you worry about it because you see it happen, but the question is, are the machines faster? Are they smarter? Are they, more precise? But there's still that human factor that actually has to be looked at. And I think it's when we start understanding when something will be automated, when something is going to be augmented, that's where we actually can make those distinctions.
Yeah. One of the things we've been thinking about is not just artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence.
Yes.
Like, how is it that will add to the experience that we have, and what is the unique thing that we will each continue to bring? And I think it's important that we are able to draw that as specifically as we can for people, because you hear all the time, oh, it's going to be really cool because the less exciting parts of your job will be automated. So we say to the HR leader, well, you don't have to do as many interviews anymore. You can do other things, but we're not clear about what those other things are yet. So it's like that trapeze moment where you're moving, you're on the trap, because we all do that all the time, right? You're on that trapeze and you've got to turn and let go and grab the other one, but there's that middle moment where you're holding on to nothing. And I think that's partly the place that we're in, right? Is work changing a lot in your organization, Joe?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, literally, I think every job is going to get significantly reskilled twice in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
In
kind of
what
the
ways?
internal mantra.
Say more.
You both just nailed it a minute ago. So I didn't know whether to raise my hand or not when you said, is a machine going to take my job? And the reason I say that is because I'm dead convinced a machine's going to take half of my job so I can do a cooler job.
Yeah.
We actually built a framework to think about this, right? And there's certain jobs that will go away, right? Things that are highly repetitive. When you do things over and over again, we get bored, we get sloppy, we make mistakes, right? Things that are massive volume, we can't handle that type of volume at that level of scale. And things that have lots of nodes of interactions, we get confused, right? If you're dealing with 5 people, it's okay. Imagine if you're doing like 100 people at the same time, that gets very difficult. And then the last part is really when you have to scale things, humans don't do a really good job. But what we're really good at is things that are complex, that can't be modeled in math, right? You're like, oh, how does that work? I don't know. There's no formula for it. And the other piece is when things require a lot of creativity, right? Right now, we make the rules, we also break the rules. And that actually helps us with that. And the last piece is fine motor skills right now. Machines aren't good at. I know they'll get better, but at least we still have a little bit, we still have a little bit of help there.
So you really answered, that's exactly what I tell people certainly at Poly and even my customers when I talk to them about, is the machine going to take the job? And as you said, it's drawn the path to the future. It's not just saying you'll be freed up to do something cool because they go, yeah, like what?
Like what?
Like what, right? But it's exactly what you just said, Ray. I mean, so much of what we're focused on is getting people to think about people. All right, how do we build technology that deals with some of this repetition, that deals with remote connectivity in such a way that people can have a rich, natural interaction just like they were in the room. So we spend all this time thinking about, man, when you're in one of these beautiful conference rooms that we saw around here and you just have that killer connection, that killer moment, why? Why was it killer? Why was it cool? I need every single creative person I can find answering that question and figuring out how to get people in that zone quicker, figuring out how to get people into that perfect moment twice as often, not balancing spreadsheets all day long. I mean, let's give that to machines, right?
Right.
So I think it's really
It's
exciting.
interesting you're talking about why. Like it sounds like you're getting at the idea of people being more aware and intentional about what their experiences are. And when we think about creating experience, we think about that holistic work experience. It's not just about amazing space and capable tools. It's also about the culture and the process and how those come together to create the experience. And one of the things, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, we like to think about culture as an iceberg. You know, you've got kind of the stuff below the surface that you can't see, which is about assumptions and norms and values and those things that you know, bump your nose up against because it's like walking into a glass wall. You know when you've hit that glass wall. But place, let's talk about place for a minute,
Please.
ends up being one of the most visible artifacts of culture, and it sends us some really specific cues. And so leadership is really critical in an organization's culture. And when leadership is present and accessible in the space, that makes a really big difference for people. Teams are really critical in the way we interact as teams and the extent to which we have belonging. And when we have places where teams can connect and feel that sense of belonging and understand that work is primarily social and fundamentally social, those places start to be really important ways that we start to raise that, raise the explicitness of culture and the experience of culture to the surface. So when you said, why do people feel the way they do and what is their explicit understanding of that, that makes a lot of sense.
It's been really fun trying to get people to get in touch with their feelings and then actually, you know, answer that. My head of design can always tell when my wife is traveling because I do these weird things. So a couple of weeks ago, I took these pictures to him of one of our new products that isn't shipping yet, but one of our new products, my car keys, and I really love my car, and my iPhone. And they were all sitting there on the counter in my house, and I was just overly focused on why does this current new product not, it didn't give me the feeling the other two, it didn't belong.
Huh.
You know, so somehow I look at my iPhone and I go, and I look at my BMW key and I'm like, yeah, and I looked at this product and I'm like, that's really good. Okay, but just why
So
is it
no
different?
emotional attachment at all.
No, well, so we talk a lot about micro emotion.
Yes.
Every single thing in our environment, do you go ooh or do you go ah? Just for a split second when you go, and why? And what do we change? And how do we play with it just a little to get there? Because we're trying to create that great human moment. And to your point, I don't think the machine's going to figure that out anytime soon.
What's really hard too, and the other thing that's happening is like we're going for really, really good or super commodity.
100%. The middle ground's going away.
Middle ground is gone.
Yes.
Right, and it's the same thing with talent. It's the same thing with technology. If it's just good enough, it's not interesting. Right? You assume it's okay. It's really cheap if it's easy, right? But if it's like really good, you're willing to connect. You're willing to pay for it. You're willing to value it. You're willing to work for it. You're willing to fight for it. And that's very, very interesting that we're evoking those types of emotions.
It is. So, you know, to shift a little bit to the practical, Tracy, you were saying some stuff earlier about, you know, some of your latest thinking on, you talked about place being important, but what are some of the other factors for why does talent join up? Why does talent stay engaged, stay at the company, or why do they leave, or even worse, stay but disengaged?
Yeah, which is the worst,
Which
right?
is the worst,
Yeah,
right?
I think there's a really interesting, and I always like to think about it as a little bit of a circle, that people generally join because of an organization's characteristics. You know, like you interviewed and you said, oh, it was a really cool culture and I got this great vibe when I was there and I can see how I can fit into that organization as a whole. So people generally join an organization. They generally stay because of their team and their individual relationships. So there's the brilliant work that's done by Tom Roth and the Gallup organization that talks about the #1 reason that people stay with an organization is because they have a best friend at work. That's about the team relationship. And the reason people leave, what's the #1 reason people leave? We all know this. Right, exactly. It's your leader. It's that terrible boss. Like, oh, I'm so out of here, right? And so I think that it's interesting to think about the relationship of organization, team, and leader. And all of those, so we're in a circle, center of the circle, in addition to the people, place, because why not, right? And so I think place has something to do with all of those. We were doing amazing work with an organization in Seattle, and they have the most beautiful campus ever, but they're a very perfectionistic culture, and they were working really hard on more experimentation, people rolling up sleeves, people putting things out before they were perceived as perfect. And the real estate and facility leader was giving a tour to his wife and his mother-in-law. So they were outside the building and they were talking about the organization and the shifts they were trying to make. And they walked in the lobby and his wife and his mother-in-law immediately started whispering. It's just amazing, right? The cues that are sent about a culture from a place. And so that is that organizational piece. What are we picking up about the culture that's palpable, even though it may not be conscious for us? And in what ways does the place support us in connecting as teams? And in what ways does the place support leaders who are accessible to us? And the idea of a line of sight where from the place I can get a sense of my customers and the community and the environment that give me that sense of the bigger picture.
So I hear you, but let me ask a devil's advocate
Good.
question on it. So, you know, we're all moving, we all see the trend to the open workspace, this gorgeous facility we're sitting in here. At Plantronics, we went to this 8 or 9 years ago to kind of live on the wild side before our customers got there. And yet, you know, we're in this trend. You talk about place being so important, yet we recently were involved in a study, and we've all seen similar ones. 99% of the people that we whatever surveyed lose at least 1 hour a day to distraction in these open work environments. 1 out of 3 of them, I think it is, feel like if they had less audio distraction around them, they'd be more productive, on and all these stats. So is this trend here to stay and it's going to be fixed? Is it here to stay and we're going to be miserable? Are we all moving back to offices? What's going on?
I think it has everything to do with choice and variety.
Okay.
We did some amazing research where we looked at 17 countries and almost 13,000 people and found that when there was a high level of satisfaction with the work experience, that was absolutely correlated with engagement, which is today the holy grail, right? But the other thing that was really important was choice and control. The more people had a sense of choice and control, the more they had a sense of engagement. Those were correlated. So a lot of the studies that have been done around open office are completely open office with no variety or choice, right? And so, yeah, my gosh, if you put everybody in a bullpen and give them no choice, they will be miserable completely. But if you've given them options for places they can rejuvenate, places they can focus, places they can get away, phone booths, that is a really, really good thing. Like one of the things we say is the more you open the environment, the more you need to give people choices in terms of privacy and focus and opportunities to get away. And so it's about, I always like to differentiate between variety and choice. Variety is, I've developed a place with lots and lots of different options for people. Choice is the cultural element where people feel like they can actually go to those places and they're not going to get the finger wag from their boss. But you may see it differently. What do you think, Ray? Weigh in.
I mean, we see a lot of companies move to the open concept and go extreme,
Right.
and people just hate it. You know, I live in a large. I live in Cupertino, and a large company moved in there, and they put in these open offices.
Really?
And the engineers said no. They didn't want to move into that large open office, so they had to build new offices that had cubes in. And as the funniest thing, we were like, you actually want to move to a cube? They're like, oh yeah, we want our privacy.
We
don't want the open office,
Right.
right? But the other factor that you're talking about, which is really important, which is engagement, right? I mean, technology helps us with engagement, other factors help. But what we realize is that there are three things that are really important to help engagement. One is being in an environment that actually helps you with recognition, so helping people actually see that work is being done, feel that work's being done, so people can say, hey, great job, right? And then access, which is really interesting, to a meeting, to something that's special that's happening in the environment. And then the third piece, which is where people really engage, is making impact. People feel like they're part of something bigger, right? And so what was interesting about in this space particular was like having neighborhoods, right? The neighborhoods are kind of neat. Okay, these are where these folks are, where you can gather, right? And having that variety is really, really important. The challenge is it's very hard to do. These are human factors. These are things that need some level of augmentation. You kind of need a little cue that says, hey, remind you to do this, right? And that next best action or recommendation that pops up, that's where we actually see AI doing the augmentation, helping us be more human. Right? When it's actually automating us, it doesn't make us feel human, but when it helps us remind us to say hello, or to pay a compliment, or to remember someone's name, or to get some context, that's where it gets important. So often you get this, like, you get that group email, there's cake on the 5th floor. I'm not even in your building, right? So getting it down to the point, there's cake 5 feet from you. Okay, yeah, I'm in.
This I need to know.
And that I need to know.
That's right.
Are you saying an app that would help us remember to say hello to each other?
I'm seeing things that are context.
Okay, that's what I got onto
I'm
too.
seeing things that are context that, imagine if I'm wearing mixed reality goggles, I see your name, I know what building you're from,
like
I might even know
Pokemon
what
Go.
department you are, and then I can say, oh, yeah, you actually met with her 3 weeks ago, right? So, hey, nice to meet you, right? Something like that would be great. Or simple things, like you walk in the building, you're in a skyscraper, you're on the 15th floor, you're in the lobby, it's 2 p.m., 27-point facial analysis, gait analysis says, hey, it's the guy on the 15th floor, send an elevator down. Just something simple like that.
Interesting.
So, or you get in the elevator, it says, hey, you're on the 15th floor, there's a 90% chance you should be on the 15th floor, would you like to go to the 15th floor? But wait, your boss is open, you've been trying to meet with her for the last 10 days, would you like to go to the 25th floor? That's a second option that pops up. And the third one is free donuts on the 5th floor.
Love it.
Know where I'm going.
I don't know where I'm going, but yeah, I might be in donuts.
I love it.
Well, it's interesting. We've talked a lot about purpose as a reason talent comes and stays, and purpose-related things. We've talked about place. What else? Over the next 3 to 5 years, kind of bringing this into maybe not tomorrow, but soon, what else is important to getting the top talent to come to your company or even gig for your company, to stay engaged, to be happy? What else is out there?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's all about that holistic experience and that opportunity to bring your whole self, right? To be able to feel like you're completely contributing. I'm such a reader, sorry. Another book title. There's an amazing book called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande.
Cool.
And it just really talks about how we all want to make a contribution. We want to matter. So it's not just the purpose, but it's also the meaning that I'm bringing. And so I think people join because of a culture. They join because they can see themselves in the culture. They join because of development. I just wrote an article about how to know if you should leave your current job. And one of the things is, if you don't see a path for yourself, if you don't feel like you've got that development, if you don't feel like somebody's paying attention, because no matter what our personality style, everybody needs connection. And work is fundamentally social, as we mentioned. And so when the workplace can meet those needs for social, can meet those needs for identity, can meet those needs for feeling connected, I think those are a really big deal.
Yeah. What do you say?
Well, I was actually going to ask you, Ray, first on this, even more practical. When we, when we talk about companies that are getting this right, Ray, you talk to all kinds of companies in your job. Are there companies that you think are getting it right? Are there specific examples of companies you admire? How are their leaders leading differently? What do you see out there?
Well, I'm going to avoid naming names, but one of the things that some professional service companies do really well is they build alumni networks. Right? And those alumni networks are so powerful because what they do is, they encourage people to leave the company, but when they leave, they have such good memories, they bring them back, right? So large consulting firms, I know the process, I know the people, I know the methodology, so when I leave, they're like, yeah, I can bring those people on, I know exactly how to work with them right away, right? The second one that we see really well is companies that actually understand that they know how to activate movements, right? We talked about this earlier, and I'll use this one because this is popular enough so I can actually name it, but Salesforce does a great job in activating movements. And what's interesting about it is they have this thing called Trailhead. There's 2 million people on Trailhead, and 500,000 of those folks don't even own the software. They're not even related to Salesforce, right? If you think about a movement like that where people aren't even related to you, it's a learning management platform, it's community network, it's getting people together activated.
Yes.
That is pretty powerful. People are writing courses, people are answering questions for each other, and they've activated a movement.
Right. Well, you know, it's so funny you used that word. That's where I was going to go next. The things that we're seeing that have the most power out there, it really is bringing all these ingredients together. People love to see a purpose that is greater than themselves. They're doing something important, but yet they feel that their individual contribution is part of making it happen. They're not just along for the ride. They are really rowing and making this occur. And if you get it right enough, the movement begins. They tell their friends. They want their friends to work there. They want their friends in the gig. They get their parents involved in joining, even though, as you say, they don't even own the product, but they want to be part of this thing that's special. You know, I think in this connected world that we're in, where curiously, the more connected we are, the more alone we can be.
Oh yeah.
We all just desperately want to belong. So belonging to a meaningful purpose, feeding into it, being part of a movement that is bigger than ourselves, I think is just incredibly important to top talent that frankly has no concern about starving. They're well above that level of Maslow, right? I mean, that's not going to happen.
They have internet.
Exactly.
You know,
Cool.
we're doing some really interesting work with an organization that is trying to treat every employee as a unit of one. And it's becoming unwieldy for them. They have no standards, they have no kind of consistency because they want to treat every employee in a really unique and different way, which is incredible and wonderful and really hard to manage. At the same time, I think it's really interesting. There's a brand new study that came out that talks about while we are all different and unique across cultures, it looked at 60 different countries and found that there are some key codes of behavior that every single country/culture shared, and none of the countries or cultures saw those as negative things. So they were things like supporting your family/your group. Think about the team environment that we need to create as organizations. There was another that had to do with being brave. Isn't that cool? Like every one of those cultures and countries supported the idea of being brave. That's about taking risk. That's about organizations that foster appropriate risk taking. There was another one about reciprocity, like doing for others because they've done for you. There was another one that was interesting that was about respecting property. And I think that's interesting. Like there are the basics, like I need a good chair.
Well, don't steal my chair.
Don't steal my chair. Don't take my stapler, or whatever that movie was. But I think there's also the idea of credit. Right? Like we're giving credit. You made the point, right? We're giving recognition. And so I think it's really interesting to balance this. Like, how do we think about individuals individually and meet their needs? And how do we create organizational cultures that also meet some of those universal principles and some of those things that make us human at the core? I mean, you talked about like the humanity element is going to be the thing that we retain when machines take over a lot of the rest. And you talked about how important that is in your culture. So I think that balance of individualism and universalism is interesting.
Now, there's one thing I do want to talk about, which is this thing about engagement, right? I don't know if everybody wants to be engaged all the time. And we touched about it a little bit.
It's the all the time thing that's important.
It's all the time is important, but I want to be disconnected and not to be seen as a terrorist, right? Like, I'm disconnected, you can't find me, it's all right, nothing's gone wrong, don't come after me, right? So there's that element of privacy that also is missing, I think, in the workplace, because now in these large environments, everybody knows everything about everyone, and sometimes I really don't want to know, right? I want to get to the point where like I can have my own space, and that's okay, and maybe that's one of those values that you're talking about.
Yeah, completely, absolutely. I think there's this really interesting concept that I've been giving a lot of thought to about give to get. And I think we're in this pendulum swing of we're giving and giving and giving as employees, right? Like sensors are sensing space so that the space can be accountable to the people. We have talent management systems where, you know, everything about us, our careers, our development path, our talents, our skills are in the system. We've got health management systems where all the health information is in the system. And so we're in this pendulum swing where companies have so much information about us as citizens, as employees, and it's all about the give. And I think we're in an interesting moment where we need to swing back to the get, because I think that we are becoming increasingly desensitized to all being data subjects all the time, and we know that that data is being gathered all the time. But I think we are in a place where we're appropriately needing to be more demanding about what we get back. So if you're going to look, there's such a cool system that we're using within Steelcase right now. We're looking at a system called Microsoft Analytics, and it looks at every single piece of data that's resident in your Outlook, in your email, everything. It's fascinating. And what it can do is
And
start
by
to say...
fascinating, you mean creepy, right?
And I mean creepy.
Okay,
Yeah,
right. Okay.
But like yes, this is the give to get, right?
Yeah.
So like we know in one of our spaces that we've implemented that now leaders are having more one-on-one meetings with their team members.
Oh, yeah.
We know that more team members are meeting with those outside of their team more frequently, which is a wonderful and beautiful thing. That's contextual awareness. But think about if we get to the point now that the pendulum swings and I get something back. Like, oh, we can see your calendar's really fragmented. We can give you some ideas to better manage your calendar. Or, oh, we can see in the talent management system that you might be well matched to so-and-so mentor or so-and-so development opportunity. So I think we're at this really interesting moment of give to get where we need to swing that pendulum toward this give to employees. Like, what is that? What is that get back for the give that we all are as data, pieces of data?
No, it's actually very interesting, right? The social graphs that are happening inside organizations themselves sometimes are being used against employees, right? And I almost want to get to the point in your give to get model, which might sound contrarian, but to make sure that that inherent employee data belongs to the employee.
Yes.
And if
Yes.
you release it, then you might get something out of it. You can
Right.
choose what you want to release
Totally.
and not have that all taken away from you and not given a monetary value or non-monetary value. And to me, I think that that level of privacy may be one of those factors that might be one of those great places to work kind of factors where, you know, do you have control over your own data and how that impacts your career path?
Completely. I know we're supposed to disagree with each other, but I actually think it's all about your choice, your control, and the transparency. Like we're being clear with people about what we're gathering, why we're gathering, and what we're doing with it. Like there isn't anything that's opaque about that. We're being really transparent.
Right. And
Well, you know, Ray actually used an interesting word a minute ago. He said he was going to be contrarian about this. You know, we have a few minutes left before we go to Q&A here. I'm interested about are there any other contrarian notions? Is there any other conventional wisdom around employees and engagement in places and generations and millennials and blah blah blah? Is there anything out there that everybody's been hearing that you don't fully buy?
I want to jump on this one. This notion
Shocker.
that age, that
Yeah,
age is
yeah.
a factor in terms of adoption of new stuff.
Oh, thank
right?
you.
There's a lot of this.
Yes.
Like I volunteer in nursing homes, right? And these folks are probably more engaged and more digital, right? We'd like to think about digital natives as people that are in their 20s or 30s or something. It's not true. We have this thing called, we have this thing that we look at how likely you use the technology and how well you use the technology, and that creates a level of adoption, which is very, very different. So age is not the deciding factor. Right. So a digital native is someone that just jumps in, uses it right away, doesn't even think about it. So there are 80-year-olds that are pounding away on iPads, texting you, talking to you, right? They don't even have paper and pencil, right? How many of you guys take meeting notes, like on paper? Raise your hands, right? Okay, you are digital immigrants, right? You're navigating between all these things, right? Now, I actually draw all my PowerPoint slides on paper first and put it in. Now, how many people take pictures of their notes and text themselves? Anyone do that, right? You are doubly a digital immigrant, right? So this makes it even worse. Now we've got digital voyeurs. They know the technology. They're not ready to jump in, so be kind to them, right? And then we have folks that are digitally disengaged. They just don't really care. They're Luddites, right? back to your point. They don't want to know the technology. They don't care for it. They're done, right? And then there's other folks that just basically discovered that it's so creepy out there. They use burner phones, pay in cash, wear hoodies, right? You know, they know Snowden was right. Tinfoil hats, right? But don't use age as the deciding factor. I think it's very important to think about, you know, how people adopt in a different way.
We, you know, once again, as much as we're supposed to disagree, thank you, because we recently were involved in a study as well that showed, oh, it's by age, blah, blah, blah. But personally, as I'm out there engaging people around the world, maybe there's a slight loose correlation to age, but there's so many exceptions, there almost is no rule, to your point. Yeah.
Well, and I think it would be really cool to think differently about how we map a career. So to your point about age, like what if we could have, instead of retirement, we have serial retirement? Wouldn't it be cool if you could retire in your 30s and maybe again in your 40s and maybe again in your 50s, right? Like retirement becomes serial. I think the other interesting thing is that I think we can overgeneralize around generations. And I think emerging work styles are just emerging for all of us. The other thing that I think is interesting as we think about talent is the idea that like war for talent has been our language and we're competing for talent. What if we weren't competing against each other for talent? What if we had pools of talent that we somehow shared and we thought about the good of the market in total? And I know that's maybe super unrealistic for some industries because talent is the differentiating characteristic. But there's a really interesting example of utility companies. And like utility companies are competing against each other, but by goodness, if there's a catastrophe, everybody's out in their trucks going to help people. And it's really hard to find workers for utility capability. And so what they've started doing is pooling some of those workers. So if some companies have ups and others have downs, people can move between companies and they can actually share the development. So they're better able to serve their customers. They're actually all better able to serve their individual needs as companies, but they've done it by cooperating. So I think it's interesting to start to think differently about not just competition as a zero-sum game, but how do we think about co-opetition and how might cooperation and competition come together in some new ways?
You know, that's a great model. We see that in the armed forces a lot because it's a first responder type of model where you actually balance out the resources to help and you do the co-training as well. I'd add a couple other things too. I think reverse mentoring is actually picking up everywhere and I think it's useful, but I think when you think about mentors and mentorees, this is the only place where I'd actually put the age gap in place, right? And I use the age gap as a surrogate is you don't want the person that's about to take your job to be your mentee, right? You need to actually skip a generation and do that. And then the reverse mentoring actually makes a lot of sense because no one ever feels threatened. So you give them as much as you can and you get back as much feedback as you can. And so skip a couple levels if you're doing the mentoring. Try not to do them too close to each other.
That's a great idea.
We actually had a fantastic response to this a few years ago at Plantronics, the company that before Poly, if you will. Very, very long tenured company, about 60 years old as a technology company in the Valley. In fact, we had an employee very recently that celebrated her 50th anniversary in the building.
Wow.
Right.
Same building.
No, yes. I mean, doing jobs in this company. She moved around. Great career path in the building of starting in manufacturing and moving to this and a different white collar job and on and on. But we did a thing 3 or 4 years ago, maybe more like 5 years ago, but exactly what you said. We took people that were very late career and people that were about 3 years into the company. Yep. So there was at least one, maybe 2 or 3 roles in between, and did an interesting reverse mentoring through the whole thing. And it was a huge hit with both people involved.
Yes.
Huge hit. So I think it's something we can really encourage. One final thought on the contrarian side, and we'll go to audience Q&A. We've talked about engaging talent, attracting talent, keeping talent in this changing world, training them on and on and on. One of the uncomfortable questions that always comes up is feedback to talent. So be it a standard performance review type thing or feedback that they need to feel or they need to work differently. Thoughts on that in the modern world?
Yeah, there's some really interesting work that's going on. David Rock at the Neuroscience Institute has been doing a lot of work on our typical feedback models tend to make us feel threatened, and that automatically shuts down our ability to listen to that feedback. And so it really needs to be much more about kind of a conversation about what we're doing well. There's also some new information on feedback that talks about how by telling people they need to do new things, that is not how people learn, and that the way that they learn is through their own experience, and the best way to shift their behavior is to reinforce what they're already doing, not to talk about what they're not doing. And so it's kind of the idea of, with apologies to all of we humans, ride the horse in the direction it wants to go. So I think those are super interesting. I also just read some research literally yesterday that talked about how they studied when you tell people what they've done and what about that has been more and less helpful versus what they should do, future focus, and how that could be more helpful. It actually sticks better when it's about the present. You did ABC and that was more or less helpful versus you should do. It just didn't stick. It wasn't memorable to them in terms of some of those new studies. But I think fundamentally, the more people feel valued under a grow light and more about what they're doing well, the more you'll get in terms of them having stellar performance.
Yeah, I add one other thing. I think we have to understand what people's motivations are, right? Some folks really do need a lot of feedback, and they want that feedback, and we do have to adjust that. And so back to the point of down to the individual one, that mass personalization at scale has to be enabled somewhere. And that does come back to the technology, the sensors, so that you can get a sense of the patterns of what's your career growth, where do you want to head, what's those objectives. If you're just happy being middle manager employee for the next 20 years and that's your goal, then that's different, right? At this point, here's the reskilling, upskilling path if you want to take it. If not, don't worry about it. We value you being here, right? If you want to just take the management track and try to fast track, okay, well, we're going to have a very, very different conversation with you and put you in that. And I think helping people self-select or understand the trade-offs, that's a first step to get there.
Well, I think that's been wonderful. I think what we're going to do is actually go to audience questions for a few minutes, and then we'll come back and wrap up with some final thoughts at the very end, if that's okay. Good. So first question.
I have two roles. One is as a career coach, and I love everything that I've heard because it goes along with helping people find work that matters to them. I also work in the state university, which is gives me an opportunity to see a completely different point of view. Couple of data points. 60% of the teachers in universities are gig workers, lecturers who make about $25,000, $30,000 a year, 1/4 of what faculty matters. So most of the people being taught in universities are taught by gig workers who have no rights, no vacation, nothing. Uber drivers make about $10 an hour because all of the costs of that maintenance are transferred to them. Same with UPS drivers. So that as we look at the gig economy, which has about 40% of the people who are working, a lot of them are the state university students who are not in the talent pool of here. There's a real unsettling, particularly with student debt, which we now have a 10% default rate on student debt in the Bay Area. A new study came out. So I'm very interested. The one thing you didn't talk about is pay. Now, pay when you're making $150,000, $200,000 as an engineer is wonderful. When you're making $30,000 or you're working at Walmart where they tell you to get food stamps because you're making $750, or Amazon where you're making $14, I'm interested in where the technology can go in terms of profit sharing with employees, so that employees actually get the benefit of that technology, whether it be Uber or whether it be Amazon, or the fact that we're looking at perhaps looking at technology as creating opportunity for people to care for others and get paid. People who are 1 in 5 Americans are caretaking, don't get paid for it, and maybe the technology helps to pay for it. So could you address this imbalance in terms of who's getting the benefit from all of this? And the vast majority of people are, I don't want to use the term income inequality because that's really not true. It's that they're not being compensated in a way that enables them to have a livable life. And the student situation, we have 50% dropping out of the state universities. A lot of it is economics. So I guess I've thrown a lot at you, but I hear a lot of rosy stuff as a career coach. I love it, but as somebody who's engaged with this population, a lot of them are living in shelters and in cars who are students and faculty, and we're not addressing it.
Yeah, no, I've seen that in multiple instances. I'll give you some context. I grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania. The kids who went to school, and I graduated in '89 in high school, the kids who went to college are mostly at home, in debt, and jobless. The kids that actually had trade skills are making $400,000 or $500,000 a year, hiring 10 people. Not everybody has to go to college. That's probably the first one. I think the second piece, which is a little bit scary and what I am worried about, and I'm in the middle of writing a book on this, is really this notion that as we continue further in this level of automation, we're going to have what we call digital duopolies. And these are basically companies that take this data, what we call data-driven digital networks, and use that in a way that's very, very efficient for the corporation, but not necessarily efficient for society. And I think that gap is already happening, and we're starting to see signs of that. It's a great example because the other factor that's happening is it's really, really good or it's commoditized, right? And that's happening not just in talent or in products or in our view in society. It's shaping the way we think. And I think that's the issue. Now, one way to fix this is if inherent human data, like your genomics, your behaviors, all the other things that are around you, your social networks, right? If that was owned by you and people paid you to use that data, you'd actually have the first step to, and keep in mind, I'm a free market capitalist in Silicon Valley, which there aren't a lot left, right? This would get you to universal basic income. Take pharma companies. They're willing to spend $700 to $800 for a de-anonymized data study to know how you're doing with drugs. If you work with 10 different drug companies, you'd get $10,000. Imagine if you're in the middle, light-saving mode, energy, right? I'm talking too much, so cut me off, right? But you get the idea that if I'm trying to use my data to actually use it for some other good, we might be able to find other uses for that data. Retail data, shopping, purchasing data. Now the danger behind that, which actually occurred in a couple instances, is the ACLU has a viewpoint that only the rich will then have privacy. So there is a danger to that because the rich might not provide that data. But it is one of the first steps to address that issue that you're talking about. Otherwise, it is going to be very disparate, and we're going to have some dystopian view of what occurs.
Next question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
My name is Frederick. I'm with the state of Arizona, and I work with a lot of employers there on workforce development. And a trend I'm noticing, a lot of employers are really mandating you will take a vacation. We will not be calling you, emailing you, bothering you, because you need to be fully rested. And you mentioned Salesforce. I remember reading Mark Benioff literally went on a 2-week excursion with no technology. He's like, I'm going to focus on my business and not get distracted. And I just have you seen any studies about when employers are really telling their employees it's okay to forget about this place for a bit and go focus on you and your family? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing that, and I think the companies are starting to mandate that. It's interesting because the front edge of that was they were actually mandating it because of security issues, like banking organizations or insurance organizations who were insisting that people take at least 2 weeks off with no contact because it was a way to audit their work, right? Because you couldn't, seriously, there was this amazing...
It wasn't benevolent?
It wasn't benevolent, right, exactly.
Darn.
I mean, I guess I like that. I think it's interesting. I think the other thing we're seeing is companies that are saying, take as much vacation as you want. But that's also not always benevolent because they know people don't. And so they found that they save money by not providing vacation in a certain increment of time. Here's my one challenge to that, though. What I want to see is people who have more of their own choices. There are some people who manage work life with more of a container theory, right? Like at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, whenever I'm done, I'm going to turn off. And I'm not turning back on. Cool. There are other people who manage their work life through the integration. So the fact that I can get that darn email done quick a minute during the halftime of my kid's soccer game ends up really adding value for me because I don't have to deal with it tomorrow morning. And so I think that the interesting thing is the more we can give people their own choice and their own control to manage in the way that they need, assuming we've created a culture where they actually feel like they can behave in that way.
I want to say the flip side behind that is you also have to make sure people understand the expectations behind
Yes.
that. I was working once in a company where that was always the norm, right? So even 2 in the morning you'd respond to an email, 4 in the morning respond to an email, right? That's kind of how I am right now. I don't expect any of my employees to do that because some work very differently. Some are project-based, so you don't see them for weeks, but you know the output's happening, so you don't worry about that. Others need a lot of feedback because they're moving really, really quickly. And so I think it's helping people also in training see that those are different styles and they're all accepted here. And you have to understand in this role, that's what they typically do. And then that way there isn't that, okay, how come they're not responding to us? It's a really, really bad thing. When I first started out at Oracle, I was on a team in CRM, and there's another team in ERP. And the ERP folks were in their 30s and 40s, and they had kids, right? And the CRM folks were all in their 20s, and they walked out, right? And we're like calling meetings at 7 a.m., nobody's showing up. We're like, what the hell, where are these people, right? We're calling meetings at 6 p.m., where are they? Like, what are they doing, right? They're home. Now that I'm 30 and 40, I totally get no one shows up till 9. He's got to drop off kids, and you got to leave by 3 to drop them off again or pick them up or do stuff. And it's not having that context that often creates a lot of conflict. You got to have that context and help people understand that.
Good. Next question.
Hi, my name is Erin Michelson. I'm the CEO of Summary. We're a data analytics company. I want to thank you all for your thoughtful commentary and discussion. It's been really, really enjoyable. I have 2 questions. One is on empathy and what you're seeing, empathy and how it's being built and basically measured and cultivated within corporate culture. And my second question is on data ethics. So you talked about the pendulum swinging back to the employee. So what are you seeing companies do to actually empower the employees to take back their data?
Good questions. I just wrote an article on empathy. We haven't hit the submit button on it yet, but there's a brand new study that talks about how a lot of times we've been taught about put yourself in somebody else's shoes and demonstrate empathy, and a lot of times we're not good at that because we're so egocentric, meaning it's really hard for us to see beyond our own perspective, and that a more effective way to think about empathy is to think about asking people what they really think. On the other hand, empathy ends up being a really important engine for us to start to get to know each other and start to know what kinds of questions to ask. And to be empathetic from a task perspective, what is it that you're facing cognitively or in terms of your workload, and also to be empathetic from personal perspective, like even if I don't know details of your personal life, to understand what that is. And one of the things that I've always liked is the idea that sociologically speaking, proximity is the #1 determinant of relationship. That's a really big deal. There's something about being present together, even if we create that sense of presence virtually. The importance of presence is that we can read each other. We know each other well enough to really go like, oh, you're having a hard day, or your wife's out of town, or like somebody needs help. And so that sense of empathy, and the more we can foster that through presence, whether that be virtual or physical, is really, really important. I don't know if you want to speak, one of you wants to speak to the data question.
Yeah, I was going to go on the data ethics side, and I think there are design points for data ethics that are important, and once that data is with you, it's a question of how is it being used, right? And so there are 5 design principles that we typically talk about. First one is making sure it's transparent, so people have an idea, understand what's being measured, how it's being measured, and then it's explainable, so you can say, hey, what factors were causing these decisions to be made? Now, the third piece becomes important because these systems are self-learning, and what you want to do is make sure that they reverse any bias or biases you don't want. Now, bias isn't a bad thing, right? Bias is okay so long you know about it. It's the unknown biases that get in the way. Like we're discriminating out people with purple hair that are left-handed that show up at work between 10 and 11. Like, how did that happen, right? So I want to be able to reverse that. And then once we get there, we want to be able to coach and train these systems over time. And then if you don't want the machines taking over, start with a human, end with a human in the process, and that way you have some level of control.
Perfect. Yeah, next question.
So I just had sort of 2 quick questions. One is about the digital breadcrumbs that people in the workplace are leaving behind. Is there any formalized effort going on to collect these portraits and engage with them in a give back kind of way? So that's one question, because they are kind of creating this portrait. And then the other question is, do you guys work at all with the idea of improvisation, like things aren't really set? Because it sounded like so much of the knowledge about work is really kind of locked down. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not being critical. I just...
No, it's great.
No, it's great.
It's great.
It just
Yeah.
didn't sound very, like there was a lot of space for improv.
This was all live improv, so.
Yeah, right. No, it's good.
I think companies have absolutely structured themselves against improv. Like as we've been looking, even if you look at the differences between Agile Manifesto-based work and traditional Waterfall work, right? Waterfall work is called Waterfall because it looks like a traditional Gantt chart. And you talk to your customer here, and then you talk to your customer again here at the end of the project, and meanwhile risk has gone crazy. And you're asked to do budgeting on a 2-year cycle, and you don't invest regularly in curating the space and the experience, et cetera. And I think what we're seeing is a shift to more agile work, which is about sprints, which says we know it's going to change, and we're going to do things in a much more incremental way so we can constantly get feedback from our customers. There's a really great example. If you leave LAX and you're bound for JFK, and your pilot is 4 degrees off, you'll end up in Washington, D.C. instead. Like, oh, 4 degrees isn't that big a deal, but this to me is the importance of improvisation. It's the importance of embeddedness of the customer, importance of the feedback process, so we can make those course adjustments. Because if we think we have it all figured out to look way out there, oh my gosh, in the olden days, we used to do visioning with CEOs that was like a 20-year window. Then we went to a 5-year window, and then a 3-year window, and now we're like, gosh, how about tomorrow? So I think improvisation is like the name of the game. I don't know about the breadcrumbs. I don't know. Do either of you have a
I'm going to jump in
perspective on
real
this?
quick because I think
Good.
agile DevOps or agile methodologies actually makes things worse. And I'm going to take a contrarian version. The reason here's why. So when I was working in Waterfall and software development, like I'd give my requirements and then throw it over to the developer. I'd never have to hear them again. I could go to conferences. I could relax. I could think about the next new product. Agile means I'm sitting there all the time with the lawyer, with the training guy, with the finance person, with the business unit, and I'm working 10 times harder. So I'm like, I'm not sure if I buy the agile piece, so I'm just gonna throw that out there. However, I think your question was actually very, very interesting, and here's why. So this level of optimization that's actually happening is because we don't trust people to do their job, right? And so automation is actually going to take up a lot of that portion. 90% in a company is all about following the process, making sure everything's compliant, it's regulatory okay, and that's just mind-numbing work that's going to go to AI, right? And that's why I actually think that part is going to go away. Now, there's 5% of the company that's doing innovation. They're doing really cool stuff, but they're really not doing innovation. They're tweaking things to be faster, better, and cheaper. And there's only 1% of a company that's actually thinking outside of the box. They're doing crazy stuff. And the people that are following the rules are like, how come they get to do that, right? So once AI comes into place, the hope is that more of our time is not doing that mundane work. The idea was that we can think outside of the box, so you're starting to focus on important things. Now, if you take a Maslow's hierarchy, like a business hierarchy, the bottom part is regulatory compliance. Don't get me killed, don't get me fired, don't get anybody sued. The next level up is operational efficiency. For every dollar invest, I'll save you 2 or 3. And the next level up is revenue and growth. For every dollar invest, I'm gonna make 4 or 5. And then we do strategic differentiation, which is business models, and then we have a brand. Right? You can't innovate unless you flip that pyramid where everyone's focused on brand and purpose, then they're focused on a business model, then they're focused on growth, and I want to automate the crap out of the operational piece and the regulatory compliance. That's why we're in this little hole we are in right now where you're talking about, yeah, can we improv? No, the answer is no, because if you do, we might miss a deadline. If you do, we might be compliant, and that's why I think your question was very, very brilliant. Now, on the data digital crumbs, we have to figure out a way to own that or find a way back to your give-get model. I thought that was pretty good.
Good. Maybe 1 or 2 more questions? Yeah.
Hi. We talked about upskilling, reskilling, all those things very regularly. In many meetings, people talk about this. Whose responsibility is it to reskill and retrain the people? Is it the work, when we talk of workforce development, it is the company's responsibility, or they want developed workforce supplied by somebody else, right? So in that process, what happens is when the skill set is not available, we said, well, we need to repurpose the skill, and one group of people are out, and we try to bring some fresh skills into the company, right? So earlier days in the manufacturing facility, companies, they used to train the workforce for 6 months to 1 year. Nowadays, it takes more than that, and many of the companies do not have the bandwidth or the mindset to go through that rigor. So how do we address that when we talk of workforce development?
Yeah, maybe I'll go first and then let my smarter colleagues actually come up with the real answer. But my answer to who's responsible is yes. Okay, who's responsible? You betcha. If a company wants to attract, retain, have great talent, part of the give-get has to be constant, perpetual retraining, re-understanding. However, I think we're all responsible as individuals. You darn well better be managing your own career, your own training, your own groups that you're involved in, on and on. So I really think it is very reciprocal, where the companies had better invest if they want to retain the talent. But I don't know, who wants to trust your company to take care of you for the rest of your life? Yeah, you better be figuring it out yourself, is my answer.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
totally agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting to think there's no such thing as meaningful work. It's not just out there for the plucking.
Right.
Oh, I've got to find meaningful. Oh, there it is. I can pluck that. I think it's something you've got to start to create for yourself, find for yourself, make some really good choices. And it's this connection and combination of both agency and structure. You know, I don't know if I can say this in this market, but you know, there was that book by that author, and it was called Lean In. You remember that one?
Yeah.
So, I mean, part of the pushback on Lean In was it was all about agency. Lean in, it's all about you. If you're leaning in far enough, by God, the rest will come. And that is wonderfully empowering, liberating, and we should all lean in. That's the agency part of it. But structure is the company, the organization, the society have some responsibility as well. So I love your answer. The answer is yes, it's a both and. Yeah.
Maybe one more question and we'll go to wrap, perhaps? Anybody have the brilliant last word here?
Brilliant last word, no pressure.
Yeah, right. No. Apparently not. Maybe we got them all. Good. So Tracy, you want to start? Any parting thoughts on the whole
Yeah, I
thing?
have two parting thoughts. One is, if you look at team dynamics and knowledge about team structure, anytime somebody joins or leaves a team, that team is a completely new team. It's not the same team except that one person changed. It's a completely new team. So I think the responsibility of leadership and organizations is different today than it ever has been. Because every single leader, almost every day, given how fast people are changing from team to team, company to company, job to job, every leader is orienting a new team. Every leader is helping to get a team up in terms of its new norms. And so I think there's just a whole new way to think about leadership and the skill that comes along with orienting new teams and acculturating new teams to each other and to the organization. That's one. My other takeaway from our conversation and this conversation together with you all is that it is a terrifying world. And there's so much facing us, and it's all going to be okay. Like, we are smart and wonderful people, and humans at our core are adaptable, and we are going to figure it out, and we are going to be brilliantly successful if we keep our eyes open.
Wonderful.
I think when I think about the challenges ahead of us and what's happening with AI, automation, robotics, and the technologies that are there, I think what we have to train everyone to be is to be a little bit more creative, be a little bit more self-aware, and also help yourself identify what you think your purpose is, right? And I think those are hard things to do, right? But I think that means as we've shifted, and this is a weird thing to say for a kid that grew up in a STEM world, I actually think that the liberal arts training is going to be even more valuable. Despite this effort around STEM, I think people need to have a little bit more balance in understanding perspective, understanding history, understanding sociology and society, because I think it's important. That perspective is going to bring back the humanity that's missing at the moment. It's also missing in the way we build things, and so I think that's one. I think the second thing is we really have to address this issue around data and how that data is being used. And I think it's up to all of us to treat data as a property right or find a way to bring that back so we have more control of it, because that's the one thing that will be working against us if we don't take back that control. So I'll leave it with those two thoughts.
Yeah. So probably less thoughts from me are a little bit more traditional, but to everything we're talking about with attracting talent, keeping talent, engaging talent, you know, as somebody that is faced with this at a medium-large company, maybe 7,500 people, they're bigger, but it's still a fairly large company. You know, I think it does all start with a vision. It starts with a vision, a purpose. What is this company? Who can you attract into that? And I think Tracy really nailed it. You got to have a vision, you got to have a purpose, but then it is a constant and continual re-engagement process. So you got to be talking to people, you got to be accessible, you got to be out with people, you got to be vulnerable. You have to be not only living the company's values, but being human so they know they can be human. The most profound thing I think I've said to my company in the last year, as it turned out, was we had you know, the early morning town hall at 7 a.m. with Europe, and then we had one in the afternoon with Asia Pac. And I actually told people at the end of the first one, with maybe 3,000 people, you know, I just red-eyed, I'm actually going to go home and take a nap before the one tonight. I got hundreds of emails that it's okay to take a nap here. Wow. Yeah, you know, I mean, it's all right. You know, you're allowed to take a nap. You're allowed to go walk your dog. You're allowed to take care of your mom. It's part of our culture. So I think, you know, you have to have a vision. You have to have a purpose. You got to have people knowing how to fit in. I think you need a leadership team that is constantly re-engaging the people and modeling humanity, if you will. And probably the real important piece of all that is really what you said. It never ends. Because, you know, it's not we're going to re-enroll the company and now we're good with it for 18 months. No, it is a different company every day. People are leaving, people are joining, the mission is changing. A huge part of leadership is re-enrolling those people in the purpose and living it every single day. So I think that's probably my wrap. Good. So, Karen,
so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives with us so candidly and for co-leading the discussion. Joe, all the prep that you did, we really appreciate it. I feel like you've given us a lot to think about tonight. As a very small gesture of our thanks to you, we have the Churchill Club speaker t-shirt.
All right. Yes.
Thank you.
Nice.
Please wear that in very good health.
Oh, yeah.
A recording of this program will be available
Nice.
on our Churchill Club YouTube channel, hopefully tomorrow. So please watch for that. You will find other recordings of most of our other programs as well. We hope that you find that to be a very useful resource. And I think we've arrived at the time when we are going to call the names of the lucky winners. Before we do that, why don't we let our speakers leave the stage so that you don't have to sit here for that. Thank you so much. Thank you.